Hi, everyone, and welcome to Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Tracy Stein. And today I am so excited to have a man who's good at so many things. It kind of makes my head spin a little bit. He'll be modest and tell you that's not true, but it is. Author and illustrator, Jon Hoefer. What am I forgetting? I'm forgetting another thing that you do.
Well, thank you for that anyway. I do some art direction, and I've been in the publishing industry for a long time. So 20, 25 years.
Absolutely. And you've written 5 books or been involved. You've either written or illustrated 5 books.
Yeah.
One with former Mayor Ed Koch, really impressive and exciting. But the book we're going to talk about today is different from all of the other projects. I mean, your art direction has been in newspapers and you've done a whole range of things. But this project that we'll talk about today, Avery's Gift, is extremely special to you.
Yeah, it is.
So without further ado, I'd love for you to tell us about the project and how you wound up doing it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Welcome,
Tracy,
Jon.
thank you for having me join you today as well. It's great to have a conversation with you and about the book in particular. Avery's Gift, it's one of those labor of love. It's one of those projects that's been kind of in the works for a long, long time. So this is actually, it's based on a true story of a fraternity brother, Mike Toole, who we've known each other for a long time in Syracuse. And, after graduation, we found out about him getting married and eventually having a daughter. And, even though we weren't, closest of friends, even through Facebook, you just stay in touch. And obviously when we're concerned about anything for our friends, we found out, a long time ago that Avery, his daughter, was born with a heart defect, which is very sad.
Yeah, she was
At the time I had two.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say, what I learned from you and the tools is that Avery was actually born with, she had a diagnosis of hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which is actually a very rare and serious heart defect. And she was 5 days old when they learned this. It
is. And actually, they found out almost immediately after a couple hours of being born that there were major complications. She had first open heart surgery at 5 days old. She had, many cardiac arrests. They did everything they could, eventually, to get her as healthy as she possibly could be. And so this is years of just, kind of her being at the hospital, months of being in the hospital, them trying to figure out what they could do. And again, these are the stories that came back to us as our family. And we had 2 young boys, and, we had, our nighttime routine, and one of which is just kind of say prayers for those people that we're thinking about. And Avery and the Toole family was one of them. So that was several years. And it basically was until she was 5 years old, where she had to be placed on the Berlin heart, which was basically a mechanical heart that was keeping her alive. And at that point, it's when our boys were very young, and, just even that conversation of what could possibly save Avery, and what she needed was a heart transplant. And that's an interesting thought or conversation is once we found out that Avery did have a donor, you knew that someone somewhere else was having a very different story in their life. Whereas we were very happy to find out that, oh my gosh, this is a possibility for Avery to live. We knew someone else was going through a very dark period. So at that point, we didn't have any details about that other than the fact that Avery did receive an organ, and it was as they say, a perfect heart. It was basically, the surgery was very successful, and Avery, at that time, was 5, and today she's now a very healthy and vibrant 17-year-old rising junior in high school. It's a success story, and this was at Boston Children's Hospital, and it's obviously they're very, very proud of that. They learned a lot, and they continue to learn a lot from Avery and what she had gone through and where she is today. And it's a medical miracle that happened.
Yeah. And so, Jon, tell me, because, here you had this relationship with the Toole family, but really more of kind of Facebook friends and former fraternity brothers or fraternity brothers, back in the day. And you learn about this difficulty that it's not even an appropriate term to capture it, because I don't know of anything that stresses people out more than when their child is ill, even if it's not a serious illness, and when your child is so ill that they may not make it without a new heart. It's hard for us to comprehend. Your work up until then, you had a broad range of things that you had illustrated and written or art directed. Tell me how you got the idea to write this book, Avery's Gift.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. And this is something that I'm happy to talk to you about today, because I think it really is finding your inspiration and what inspires you. And so I had worked in the graphic industry, graphic design and publishing, and I had just finished actually Eddie Shapes Up, which is the book that you had mentioned before with Ed Koch. It's one of those things as an illustrator, which is nice too, is you get the story, you get to kind of absorb it, and then you get your own little mental pictures. I'm a very visual person, so you get to see, okay, what does this character look like? What are some things I like to call them little Easter eggs, things that we have a privilege of because we're drawing the illustrations, is what are some things that we can put in there? So, some things related to me. There's a picture of my wife and I in the park and my boys playing Frisbee, and there's also some relations, to the characters. And so these are some things that I enjoy through the process of working on books. And so, being a creative person and also knowing that I wanted to continue and do other books in the future, there's always this concept, little, journaling of, what are some ideas that are out there. So to be honest, even though I knew of what happened with Avery, and we were obviously very pleased to hear, that was not the spark for the book. I was obviously very happy for them, very happy for Avery, happy to hear that things had gone well. It wasn't until, so if we were looking at a timeline, so that was probably 2009, and we actually had moved over to Switzerland, and we were there for 4 years. So one thing about kind of getting up and packing up and going overseas, I knew we were going to be there for a little while. So in some ways, even just thinking about, okay, what are some projects that I can work on? And so had been some other books that in my mind, I'm like, if I got some time, let's, this might be a really good time to kind of focus and do some of these projects that have been on the back burner for a while. I do remember that I had received a link from someone that we were talking about the Toole family. They had just been published in People magazine, because the story was, which isn't all that common, is that the Toole family actually connected with their donor family. And we found out that the owner, basically the organ donor, Dalton Lawyer, he was an 8-year-old boy, and he's the one that donated his heart to Avery, which saved/gave her life. Boston Children's Hospital put together a really nice video, like a 9-minute video of just interviewing the Tooles, kind of going through their process. You saw their heartache. You obviously saw leading up to that point, but like you had mentioned before, it's hard to imagine, put yourself in that position of what was life like on a day-to-day basis for the Toole family. I think Avery didn't know anything different, really. I asked her right out, like, how, and I have the pleasure of speaking to her now, is, what was that time like for you? And for her, that's really all she knew. Right. Her life was in the hospital. A large percentage of her life was in the hospital.
Absolutely.
Her friends were doctors and nurses and basically people. And, that weight that was on the shoulder of Mike and Cheryl, even though you would never see it now when you're talking to them, or even when you say, what was it like then? That was their mission. Their mission was to do whatever they could to what was best for Avery. So again, I couldn't imagine carrying that weight for that long.
And something inspired you to write this book. And usually you're the one doing the illustrating. Like you said, you're a very visual person. Yeah. And yet you were impelled to write this story, because most people, when they think of organ donation, they think, I think just naturally they think of adults and, rather than children. And Dalton's family had to make an incredibly difficult decision.
They did.
He is in an accident. The injuries are to his head.
Yeah,
the rest of his organs are healthy.
Yeah, Jim and Jerry both work at hospitals. He's an anesthesiologist, and she's a registered nurse. So
this is Dalton's parents.
This is Dalton's parents. That I think just in the back of their mind, they obviously were in a very dark period, but they understood. They understood that, and even the father said that where he's going, he's not going to need these. And so
exactly.
But to answer your question, so when we were living over in Switzerland, I did get this link to this video. And I do remember watching the video and obviously being friends with Mike and Cheryl and knowing the story and, sitting and praying but now to see it as all visual and see it all kind of unfold and these photos of her in the hospital and getting older and then being introduced to the Lawyer family and seeing photos of Dalton and then understanding that they reached out to find each other, which doesn't always happen. And to the point where we also found out that Dalton was the oldest of, there's 4 kids in the family, and basically he was the brother of 3 triplet brothers. And so it was devastating for the family. And, but to have that connection and to see on the video of how they were open to basically embrace each other. They actually went to Cape Cod. They went on vacation. Avery became fast friends with the triplets. And part of it is filling the void, finding the beauty behind the tragedy. So in watching the video, there was probably, obviously there was a lot of things. It was very moving for me. I was very touched on how it was put together and how honest and raw it was and how just there's so many of the unknowns as to what could have happened. And the fact that all of this came together and these 2 families came together and ultimately these 2 kids came together. It was really, really powerful. So there was 2 parts of it. One, Mike Toole, Avery's dad, made a comment that after the successful heart transplant, the first thing he noticed is that Avery had bright pink lips. For the first
time, being very pale and blue-lipped for her whole life.
Well, right, because she technically with this heart defect is you're literally born with half a heart, and so they have to try and do all sorts of things. So she'd never really had a strong enough heart to pump blood all through her body, and so she was always tired and always. Even when she would get out of the hospital, she just couldn't do what other kids did. And again, Avery only knew that, right? But as parents, basically Cheryl and Mike would say, it was heartbreaking for them to go to these kids' parties and just watch Avery sit because she just couldn't run and play like everybody else. Right. And so to have that realization is that, okay, and maybe that was the spark of, okay, maybe that was that first instinct, okay, that's an interesting element to, if we were to do a story. The second part, which I'd love to delve in a little bit more later,
sure,
was, I do have a sense of afterlife, of what does happen after we pass, the sense of souls or people that come back and visit you or other people. So there's a part in the video where Cheryl relays when Avery was outside playing basketball with the triplets. Now, mind you, at this point, she's 6 or 7. She's healthy.
Had her heart.
She has Dalton's heart. And she's out and playing basketball, and she has a bunch of chalk, like most kids have chalk. And the one thing that they had noticed is that she had written, "I love you, Dalton," on the driveway. And then she ran back inside and told Cheryl and said, Mommy, I just saw Dalton." It's like, what? And she said, "Yeah, I saw Dalton. He was in the sky and he was waving at me." And so now I'm a true believer in, that here we are, these 2 young souls that are connected in some way.
Yeah. And
that line of the bright pink lips, I'm like, basically him giving her life. There was something about it. There was something about, after reading it's a tragic story, but yet it's a beautiful story. Like there's that happy and sad feeling when you watch it. And so it was one of those, whether it was an itch to scratch or something, but I'm like, there is something here. There's an idea here. I didn't know quite what it was. So this is 2011, and I started kind of playing around with an idea of what I ultimately wanted to do was tell the story of these two souls connecting. And I wanted to do it in kind of an abstract form. And so, correct, I had the vision of me illustrating this story. And so the idea is that, okay, I didn't want it to be mechanical, but I wanted it to be more fluid, but I wanted it to be the story, a little more dreamlike. And so I had actually...
It's very multi-layered. It's very metaphorical. Like you were mentioning, at a book talk recently, there's the meaning behind the meaning behind the meaning.
Yeah.
So a child can read the story and stay at the superficial level. And as they get older, get the deeper meaning that you have embedded.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those. It's a funny thing because even just talking to my wife, I'm like, I have this idea, just like a breakfast over coffee. Like I have this idea of a children's book that is, around Avery and Dalton's story, and so it touches on organ donation, and she's like, it's like, okay, okay, that's great, I mean, the idea is, okay, how do you do a children's book that carries such a heavy topic? Obviously, just joking, you wouldn't want to say, okay, well, there's a story about you dying, maybe dying. Okay, good night. You wouldn't do that.
No.
But what I wanted to do is have it be a story. And again, other things that I do is I like puzzles and puns and things that can be looked at a couple different ways. So I wanted to have this book that could be viewed in two different ways. So I was.
I'm going to share some of the photos as you're talking about the book, because I want, people who see the interview on YouTube can see your very serious and professional photo and this beautifully illustrated book. Now, you did not illustrate this book, and that's unusual.
So it is a little unusual. So back in 2011, when I was over in Switzerland, I was working with a friend of mine that also did some writing. And so she and I said, well, let's, I had this idea in my head. Let's just kind of collaborate a little bit on the story. So she did, a couple rough drafts, and it was coming out too heavy for me. Like it was coming a little more mechanical. She did a great job of writing it, but it just wasn't sitting right. And so anyway, we're going to fast forward several years. And I guess this is one of those things and to encourage people that, inspire to do something, it's okay to actually put it on the back burner and let it sit for a while. It always had a title. Avery's Gift was like, I wrote that down 2011, long time ago. And it was during the time, it allowed it to marinate and percolate a little bit. And, there were some certain times it was like the image, what I was looking at for the book was all coming together a little bit more. I needed to take the mechanics out of it. And so what I ended up doing was the idea was to take the mechanics and put them into nature. So with the understanding that what I wanted to tell was the story, which I actually haven't gotten into too much of. I've worked with schools. I don't really talk about the story behind the story.
Right.
But for me, I feel like the magical thing that I had gotten from that video, it would have been the time when the procedure was about to happen and that Avery was in the operating room. The tools were, sitting in the waiting room waiting. Lots of doctors ready to do and perform this medical miracle. And it was one of those where that Avery would have gone under, and then that's when that's when the story begins.
This dreamlike state
because
that she finds herself in.
Right, because then there's this period of time we knew that Avery's heart that she possessed now would have to be removed, and then Dalton's healthy heart would be inserted. So,
and I'm going to share just a few pictures because I'd like people to be able to put a face not only to you and to an image to the book, but this is Avery, shortly after she's born. Adorable kid.
Mm-hmm.
And here she's a toddler. And actually here her color looks pretty good, but you can tell that she's, carrying a lot around for a child that young.
Right.
This is not a child, like you said, who can run and play with other kids.
Oh, right.
And this is Dalton Lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
beautiful soul, beautiful little boy whose life was tragically cut short, and his parents, an anesthesiologist and a nurse, decided to give the ultimate gift.
Yes.
And then here's Avery after her heart transplant.
Yes.
And she has color and she's animated. And you mentioned before the families meeting, and here's Avery with her mom and Dalton's mom and and Dalton's triplet brothers.
Yeah, it's Ty, Miles, and Austin.
And they become like family.
Yeah, they said they connected immediately.
Yeah, adorable.
Yeah. And again, it's beautiful to see them together. It's beautiful to see them happy. The circumstances surrounding it is devastating. But the same sense, that's part of it, is looking at the beauty behind the tragedy. And so for me, with the process, is that sense of Avery kind of her, it's most like her soul being, kind of elevated and looking at being aware of her surroundings. And so maybe it's similar to maybe if you've ever had a dream and it kind of takes elements from things from all over the place and kind of makes sense. And so for her, what I wanted to do was all the mechanics of what was happening became more metaphors and in the book itself. So the fireflies, the halo of the fireflies is actually the light that would have been over the operating table. The butterflies that would be giving her butterfly kisses are the doctors that are kind of working around her. The crickets that are chirping and asking her to come out is the beeping of all of the mechanics and the obviously everything that's in that operating room at that time. But it's her to kind of get a sense of getting up. I don't know if in that picture where you show Avery after her procedure.
Can you share it again?
So these are some things that actually I went back later. Because if you look at her hospital gown. So in the book itself, there's the roses that are on the wallpaper of her bedroom. And the roses are what actually lead her outside and into the garden. And so that's part of that. What I was trying to do is, even if you go back to some other photos, she has like butterflies that are hanging from the ceiling for some of the video. There's all sorts of little elements through that 9-minute video that I basically kind of absorbed. That these are some things that would have been top of mind for Avery as she's going through this. So this is everything with the fireflies. And so we mentioned a little bit, because obviously we started by saying I'm an illustrator. And as I was talking about when I was working with the words were a little mechanical, but I had this vision of what I ultimately wanted it to look like. So I've sketched it out, to the point where I'm like, okay, this is kind of, the lay of the storyline itself. Children's books are usually 36 pages, so you have to kind of think about spreads and how many words and how long it would be read. So these are things that I'm kind of just working through as I was about to approach a writer and say, okay, this was what the illustrations would look like. Well, then I started looking at my own self and say, you know what, I've done other books. I felt like my style was a little cartoony for what was in my mind. Again, I could maybe play around with it a little bit, but I'm like, you know what, I wanted it to get a sense of looking like an older book and not a more modern book, because even though it's a modern story, I wanted it to have like an older look and feel. And so I was working on another project probably around 2017, 2018, and I stumbled upon Milana, who is a watercolor artist from Russia. And immediately I saw her portfolio and I was like, that's the style. That's what I'm looking for Avery's gift. And so, it's a very, and many people have seen it, and it has this Eastern European look and feel to it. And that, again, I'm very proud of the work that we've done and working with Milana on it. We collaborated really, really well. Even though there was a little bit of a language barrier, we never spoke by Zoom. Everything was by email. I sent her a couple of written texts, and she basically said she needed everything typed out, because then she would do it like a translate. As cool as that was. So her English is fine, but definitely there was that. This is a very global project, So I was happy with that. And then even now that I said, okay, this is the look I was looking for, I also wanted to have that sound like an old story. And, I've done, several writing projects in the past and creative writing. And again, I kind of face it as like a little piece of the puzzle and say, I want to put the words to the visual. I mean, this story is so close to me. And so what's interesting about this, this is a very unique project anyway. But this book in particular might be one of the first books that was illustrated first and then written later. Usually it's the words are written and then you may come up with the words to come with it. So I had actually sketched out the entire book, working with Milana. What did Dalton look like? What does Avery look like? What are some of the key things that we wanted to have in there? I probably spent another hour talking about all this, the symbols that are in the book, but I wanted to make sure those were all there. And then as I was working with her, and I knew I wanted to have that old world sound, so that's where I decided I wanted to do more of a prose. So it is a very rhythmic, rhyming story. And, that I'm very, very happy on how it came out. It's one of those things that just didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of massaging to it, a lot of word change, a lot of things that got, segments moving in and out. But again, that happened at the exact time of working with Milana on the images and knowing exactly how much space we had and all of that. So.
Sorry, I'm going to apologize to you and to anyone listening. I can't tell if you could hear the drill periodically. As I mentioned before we started today, we have people doing work here, and I'm just thinking, I hope this lavalier mic obscures, filters out.
I can't hear it, so we're okay.
Thank God. I wanted to also ask you, because that obviously, we've talked about this. I have an interest in various spiritual matters, and you were a spiritual person. You were a spiritual person before this project.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure I want me to ask you to tell me in a moment about how your spirituality may have changed or deepened. But there's something you put in the book that, made my ears perk up right away. Mm-hmm. Dalton has two things on this trip that are very important to him. And one is a roadmap.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he had, to help him light the way, basically.
Right. Yes.
Like I love that you embedded in there a sense that he understands he's only there for a limited amount of time, that he has an important message and an important gift, but that he also has guidance for where he's going.
He does. And that was, so it was very, very important. So for me, it was these two souls that are coming together. And the idea was that, Avery basically stepping out of bed and just kind of wandering a little bit. She was not exactly sure where she's going. Dalton is very, very put together. He's he's all dressed up, like he's going to go to a party. He's in a beautiful boat. He has a direction, he knows exactly, that there is a little bit of limited time. He has some, there's a little bit of a nervousness to him. But one thing that I learned through this is that by Dalton's parents making that agreement to donate his organs, he actually saved 4 people, and with Avery being one of them. And so his
heart, his lungs,
kidney, and one other. So it's more internal. So it was, it's a beautiful thing. And they say that to agree to be an organ donor is it's the sincerest form of, kindness. It's the ultimate act of kindness, because it's selfless. It's really, I'm going to help somebody.
Literally.
And I don't know who that person is. So touching on that, that was one of the symbols for me was that, that Dalton was on a trip and he's on a journey, and this is his last stop. And so my feeling is he's already seen the other 3, that he's now on this boat and he's now stopping to see Avery. And the last thing he has is he's got one last gift in his pocket, which is this, it's a locket in the shape of a heart, that he reluctantly but willingly gives to her. Like, I know it's important, but this is something I need to do. And so he, gives her the locket, and then with that, and then the embrace, and it's not just the locket itself; it's the I'm giving this to you wholeheartedly, and we are now soul friends forever. And with that hug, that's the premise. The beginning of the story is that Avery's lost her gift. And then with this gift, she gets all of her colors back and more vibrant than ever. And then with that, then Dalton leaves, and he's given a map and an invitation. And he also says there's people waiting for him. And so we have that sense of heaven. And so it's not, even though it's a heavy story, maybe can be some solace to anybody that might be on the other side. I wanted this to be a book just not only about the happiness of what happened with Avery, but just that the understanding for Dalton's family, that Gabe made the ultimate sacrifice with this, but made that his legend and he will live on forever through these people. And so that was very important for me and for them, in talking to them.
And it's interesting because you mentioned, because I had seen the video a while ago and then I saw part of it this morning, and I had forgotten that when they were playing basketball, that Avery said, this is 5 or 6 year old Avery, 6 years old, I think. And she said, Mommy, I saw Dalton in the sky and he's happy. When that's not unheard of with people who have received an organ transplant, that they have some sense of the person who was the original owner of the organ, the organ donor. I've heard everything from people having vivid dreams about the organ donor, even before they have any information about them, and with information that's actually accurate. Having food cravings that they never had before that were specific to the organ donor and so forth. Just the fact that Avery and Dalton's family have such a strong connection. And there's actually one point where Dalton's father, this is not in the book, this is in real life, asks to listen to her heart.
Yeah.
This is a little girl who has really only recently met this man, and she raises her shirt so he can listen to his son's heart beating in her chest. And I found that so incredibly moving. And what I liked is that even without being explicit about that in your story, just their embrace and his gift to her and this friendship and this ongoing connection really did come through. That spiritual thread without being so overt.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I'm very, very pleased on how it turned out. I mean, it was a process and a fairly long process, but again, it was fun for me again as an illustrator to put little Easter eggs or little things in there. We had mentioned I wanted to have this be a little bit more about Dalton as well, but also to honor his family. And so the 3 golden buttons that are on his vest, each of them represent one of his brothers, the triplet brothers. And then he's also carrying 2 lanterns, and those 2 lanterns represent his mother and his father. And so, they can read the story and see themselves in him, and knowing that wherever he is, that they are with him, and vice versa. And so to have that connection, and so that was important for me. And so to have that, and I think the coloring and that gift of color, the gift of life. It's funny. I mean, I've read the story to 4th graders, and we actually never get to the story behind the story. But to hear their reaction of the story itself, it's the power of, have you ever felt like you had low colors? Like, have you ever felt like you were sad? So I think they saw Avery as sad. Maybe she was sick. We never really talked about how serious it was. And in the dream, they have their connection. And again, it's one of those, if you've ever had those dreams where you meet someone in a dream and you become great friends, you have no idea, but maybe you have that feeling of, oh, I've known this person for a long time. Or a dream can last maybe 30 seconds in real life, but could feel like it's been 6 hours. And so in the reality of what just happened, this is probably a very short amount of time. But I wanted that to have that. They have this connection where they play and they develop this immediate friendship. And the 4th graders they're very smart. So they picked right up on the connection. One of the kids said, that they loved the fact that they were good friends. They loved the fact that friends, that he gave her colors back by doing nice things for her. One of which I loved was a girl said that they liked the fact that Dalton was willing to be friends immediately, even though she looked different. Because obviously in the book she is
so great.
And so that sense of, I'm going to be your friend even though you don't look just like me. So it was amazing to have conversations, even though this is a lot deeper than we would have ever gotten with them. But on a surface level, for them to understand, appreciate the story was pretty neat.
And I think I agree with you. I think it's just really great. And I agree with you also that the kids, even young kids, pick up on things on a variety of levels, even if they don't have the life experience or even the language to fully articulate it consciously. Right. And I think, look, we do have children who pass away. And at some point, many children will have the experience, hopefully not too many, but of a classmate being ill or a friend passing away or moving away, right? So there are different types of kind of moving to a place where they're not accessible anymore. And I think this kind of story brings comfort for that range of experiences that are painful, they're lost.
Yeah, I hope so. It was actually probably one of the best compliments I received was from Dalton's father that said, that when I gave him the book to kind of preview, and at that point it was just more rough sketches and the text. And he wrote back and highlighted saying, that he loved the book. But that one phrase of, page 26, where I've been given a map and invitation, there are people waiting there for me, was truly, like he said, that it became a cascade of tears he wasn't expecting. It's just the understanding that he's at okay place, and he's with other people too. So that's anyway, that was probably the nicest compliment. A lot of it, sometimes you get really close to a project, and I had to be very sensitive because this is not my story, it's their story. I wanted to make sure that we were honoring both kids and both families appropriately.
Right. And just to bring awareness to the importance of organ donation, I think you may have addressed this in the book talk the other night, and I believe the Tools also addressed this, and it's certainly addressed in the video. But when your child is in a tragic accident and you know that they won't, you mentioned earlier that his father said that his head was injured, but that Dalton's other organs were actually very healthy and that he wouldn't need them where he was going. I think it's, again, I don't have the language to describe how hard it's got to be for parents to have to make that choice.
Oh, I can't imagine.
But it's important to be able to talk about things and think about them, and raise awareness of organ donation, including organ donation for children. And so I think the book really highlights such an important topic that never gets discussed until people are at that incredibly painful juncture that no one wants to be at.
Yeah, I've been working closely with Boston Children's Hospital as well, and working with their staff. They don't know of any other book that's out there that addresses organ donation. And then I was also the pleasure to work with Donate Life America that are collaborating with this. So I'm getting more and more information about this as well. Right now there's over 100,000 people that are waiting for some form of organ donation. Many of them are pediatrics or kids. And, in talking to some other people, and they're saying, okay, why is it important to read this book to let children know about the importance of organ donation? I'm not saying that it's important for the kids to know. There are certainly circumstances and families that either might have another family member that is in need of an organ, that this could be a vehicle as to what needs to happen and why it's beneficial. Some children are going through this right now or have gone through this. And so in some ways it might give a little solace, happiness, inspiration of their own to read and kind of see their own story in this story.
For a child waiting for an organ transplant.
Yeah. So what the other thing is, I also think that this, probably one of the best things is that you can read the story without having to go to the story behind the story.
Absolutely.
Read the story, enjoy the story, kiss your son or daughter goodnight, and then go into the other room and read read behind the story afterwards. Get an understanding about the real story. And then maybe that's a little bit of a seed that's planted in the back of your mind, which you never want to think about. But if something horrific were to happen, it gives you that, okay, there is an option. And it's the beauty behind the tragedy, is that in your darkest moment, you can make a decision that can actually change many lives, even though it's a terrible thing that might have happened to your family, but to think that this might actually help others. It's just a little snippet of information that you may never, or hopefully you never have to think about. But if you do, know that you can make a difference. And even, in Dalton's case, there was 4 lives that were saved. But we also have the understanding that if you do agree to be an organ donor, that you can actually affect up to 70 people with everything from eyes to tissue to kidney to heart to all that. So there is a difference than just checking the box on your state driver's license. That's what we're encouraging people to do through Donate Life America. Actually, at the back of the book, you can go to averysgift.com. There's more information on this as well. We have a campaign through Avery's Gift to just encourage people to become nationally registered donors. And really what that does is it puts you immediately into a database. So I'm in Florida here. Right now I have an organ donor for Florida. If something horrific happened to me and there's a gentleman that's in Washington that needs something, that would put me into an immediate database of that connection of blood type, because it really is a matter of hours, if not minutes. And so that would be some of the things that we'd like to encourage older, people to do. And even, I say older, but it could be young as, we have 16, 17, 8-year-olds that are in the process of getting their driver's license. They're checking a box without really knowing what they're doing. Again, hopefully that nothing will ever have to happen, but this is a good vehicle, and it's a softer way of addressing the topic than just showing pictures of car crashes and all of this. It's showing,
most definitely. Yeah. So, Jon, I'm so glad you mentioned Donate Life America. You mentioned the website, averysgift.com. Mm-hmm, yeah. And the book is available on Amazon.
Yep, it's everywhere on all online stores. Target,
everywhere books are sold. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of those links in the YouTube description, because I have more leeway there than on the other podcasting sites. But really encourage people to go take a look at the book, purchase the book. It's really important, and it's so beautifully done. And read more and educate yourselves about organ donation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're going to be doing some programs in the fall. We're working with schools. If you are a teacher, especially whether it's lower school, again, it works perfectly fine, 4th grade down. Upper school, we're now beginning to talk about the creative process. We're also talking about organ donation and kind of the inspiration. And then for the older kids, even in high school, we do have representatives with Donate Life America that we're actually going to be working with to talk about it, talk about what does that mean to check the box. And again, fantastic. I almost feel like with this, the kids will then educate the parents a little bit too.
Wonderful.
I think it's important.
Terrific.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Jon, thank you so much for taking time out of a busy schedule to speak with me today and talk about this really important work, Avery's Gift. I'm so glad you made time to come and do this today. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Big fan of yours. You do terrific work. So.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, this has been Unpacking Possibility, and you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on iTunes, on YouTube, and wherever else you get your audio content. So until next time, be well.